Welcome to Going Fractional, the podcast for executives ready to rethink leadership, learn how to transition, thrive, and build freedom through fractional rules. Real strategies, bold insights, no fluff.
Welcome back to Going Fractional. So this is the podcast that is designed to help executives that are considering going fractional kind of take that step into kind of the fractional space, using their experience to kind of build a business a little bit more around their schedule and their expertise. And I'm certainly excited to be bringing AJ Schneider into the conversation, who has recently made the transition to fractional with a tremendous amount of experience in the moving industry, and now hopefully applying that to a handful of clients directly. So AJ, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you being on the episode today, and I'll let you do a kind of a quick introduction.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. So I spent a long time in the moving and storage business. I worked for a company called Wheaton Worldwide Moving, headquartered here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was fortunate enough to kind of work my way up through the company. So to your point about sort of the level of experience, I was in just about every position you could be in there, with kind of a focus on marketing and sales. And then ultimately became the president of the company. And in terms of why I decided to, you kind of teed that up in terms of why I decided to sort of go fractional, as it were. After so many years, kind of concentrating on the same kind of subject matter, I really was getting to the point in my career where I wanted to really concentrate on my core competencies, which again were marketing and sales. For good fortune comes along with a lot of baggage sometimes, right? And so I inherited things like HR, and I inherited claims, and I inherited various parts of operations that were interesting, but not the thing that really makes me tick. And so it just felt like a good time to say, hey, I've done really well. I've been again very fortunate. I'm gonna give this a try and focus more on the things that I really want to. So
Love it, man. Love it. Yeah, that really is always my first question. I always like to know, hey, what kind of encouraged that first step into fractional work? I think this generation, and maybe it's not even the term is probably the wrong one. Generation's probably the wrong term. It might just be at this point kind of in history, you know what I mean? Where I think you and I talked a little bit about this last time we spoke, but where so many people learned like, oh my goodness, 5 years ago, everybody had to work from home. And so it kind of became one of those things where it's like, well, maybe we can all kind of start working from home in some capacity again. And I think it really began this mindset shift of people with tremendous experience, who had reached a point in their career where they'd done really well for themselves. And they were like, you know what, maybe I can, offer this to more than just one company. And so I always like to better understand really what was that driving factor and quotation marks going fractional. That's why the name of the podcast is what it is, man. So I appreciate you sharing that. So
yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So I'm a storyteller. I like to hear people's stories. And so I always like to ask the question, what up to this point in your career, what's kind of been your mountaintop? What's been that thing that when you look at your career, you're like, man, that was really when the tuning fork was humming and I had achieved something special, or at least we had created a system that was working in such a way where I just was really proud of what I'd done there.
Yeah, well, I think well, all right. So I'll tell you in storytelling fashion. I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
So probably I want to say it was in 2012, 2013. We at the van line that I worked for went on an acquisition spree, and ended up being the largest of our acquisitions. Was our first one, and it was a really important brand within the industry that we were purchasing, and they had kind of fallen on some hard times financially. The agents that worked underneath that brand that flew that flag, some great agents, but they were kind of becoming a little disillusioned. And so when we came in, it was really important that we created a new environment, really got the troops fired up, as part of that acquisition. So they didn't just see it as being something that Like, oh, great, here's the next, owner that's going to try and put their, crappy stamp on it, and it's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. So we really wanted to come out of the gate strong. And at the time, I was the VP of marketing and sales. And so it really fell to me to make sure that the reinvigoration of the brand part of that, it really kind of fell to me. And I remember I had just been out, I think I was in California visiting some of the prospective agents that were going to come on board as part of this. And I remember um, I was looking at some magazines that I picked up in the airport, and they were some design magazines, right? So for design nerds, people, who like to look at advertising and that kind of thing. And I was looking through these magazines, and I came across these full page ads for this company that that made cheese, right? I'm not making this up. And and they had taken these really beautiful pictures of their cheese, like in these these giant cheese wheel wedges,
Yeah.
and the way that they had created the headlines around their product, which is something I'm completely uninterested in,
Yeah. Right.
really hit me. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna steal this. I think that this sort of this kind of style and the way that they were writing their taglines and so on. And it really hit me. Now, obviously, it wasn't sort of a literal, move to go from cheese to the moving and storage business, but it was kind of the odd inspiration for it. And so when
Yeah.
I got home, I started playing around with that look and that feel, and came up with the new tagline. And so the brand in question is called Beacons. And it's a venerable, brand in the moving industry. It's been around for, I don't know, 120 years at this point. Was one of the original, some would say, depending on the lore, I mean, they invented sort of the modern
Oh
moving business.
wow.
Um, there's pictures of the Beacons family hauling stuff around in horse-drawn carriages. I mean, it's
Wow.
like a venerable thing. And so the tagline that I came up with, that was sort of inspired by the structure of what I had seen in that magazine, is called "This is Moving." And the whole idea behind it was that, when you see the Beacons brand, when you see a Beacons truck out there, it should be synonymous with the action that they're performing, right? And so
Yes.
the idea was to say, look no further. Like, this is moving. This is
Yes.
this is what this looks like, the right way, and so on and so on. Anyway, so it was well received, and we went from trying to peel stuff off of the old trucks and all that stuff, basically overnight, to these new decals and so on. Now, I can't say that it was because of that tagline, but for the next few years, Beacons did very well in terms of growing its sales and so on, as part of that process. So you
Yeah.
talk about mountaintop. That was one thing I can think of that was very satisfying as
Yeah.
part of my career.
And just to confirm, that was the brand that you guys were acquiring.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So, that I'm gonna go off script here just a little bit because I want to ask a couple follow-up questions because I'm sure that there are probably people that are in the moving industry that are maybe listening to this episode and curious, thinking somebody who's been so successful in the marketing, the selling side of moving. You and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we talked about it. And there could be companies out there looking for support, marketing and selling support for moving. The way that you kind of positioned it was like, moving is horrible. It's tough, right? Like, it's like you're even if you have a great experience, you don't ever want to do it again, right? Like, it's just like, so how do you take that concept of like people that are getting ready to move, they're sort of like, okay, psyching themselves up, they're trying to, sort of preempt what they're about to go through, and like, okay, we only have to do this once every 16 years or 15 years, whatever. How do you introduce that concept of a tagline that hopefully gives, I guess, some level of peace, patience, security, whatever, how do you introduce that into a business that maybe does moving, that sort of at least helps let people know, hey, we know what we're doing here?
Yeah, yeah. So I think you touched on it with some of the words that you chose, right? And this is going to sound incredibly cliche because every agency that you might talk to, they're going to say the same thing. But in this case, it's absolutely true. It's the concept of, what are you selling? We used to joke, we're not selling moving, we're selling trust.
Yeah.
And I think there are a few industries out there, certainly from a service perspective, let's say we'll separate products and services, but certainly from a service perspective, where that trust factor is just enormously important, right? I'm going off the fly here. I'll come up with some sort of silly examples, but if your exterminator, if you're having your we just had our house sprayed for bugs, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if your exterminator is here and they do a bad job, right? I mean, that's not good. You're not
Right.
happy with them. Maybe you'll get a few more mosquito bites, but it's not like it's not going to be a life-changing
Yeah.
kind of situation, right? If your toilet gets clogged and Roto-Rooter comes out or whatever, it's unpleasant, but it's not fundamental to your life.
Right.
In the moving and storage business, it's fundamental.
Yes.
I have your entire life's possessions on a semi truck, right?
Yep.
And I'm moving you, let's say, to California, right? That's a lot of space to go from the Midwest, let's say, to California. If something happens to your stuff, you're in serious trouble,
Yeah.
right? And I think the gravity of that realization requires a level of trust that many other service businesses really don't, right? So from a marketing perspective, that's where the concentration really begins. So let me take a step back, and I did not do a good job of introducing the parent company, which is Wheaton Van Lines. To Beacons, the company that we were buying, and the Wheaton brand is called Wheaton Worldwide Moving. This was before my time, but there was an agency in Indianapolis that I think that is no longer in business, but they developed the tagline for Wheaton, and the tagline is "We move your life." And so between "We move your life" and "This is moving" on the Beacon side, I always felt that those really got to that trust,
Yes.
factor when it comes to marketing. And so, as you and I were talking, I think the conversation you were referencing, it's you really can't create demand for the moving business. You can only meet it, right?
Yes.
Because the demand is going to be like right now, things are slow because interest rates have been high, and the prices, real estate prices have been high, and so people aren't as mobile as they were in 2020, for example, a whole other situation. So to appeal to them where they have so many choices within the moving industry, many bad choices, and not as many good choices. Um, that appeal, that trust appeal, right from the beginning, is just incredibly important because of what we just talked about. How
Yeah.
much is at stake, and so you end up spending a lot of time in that business, talking about trust. Now, the tough part is that, and I believe that the customer experience more so today than in the past is really blended with the marketing piece of it, in the sense that if you don't deliver on that promise on the front end, it erodes very quickly, right? And
Yes.
that's when you start seeing the negative reviews. If you're looking for a moving company, oh, these guys stole my stuff. These guys weren't on time. These guys, this, that, and the other thing. They kicked the cat, whatever, whatever the case is. There's a lot of problematic, situations there. So it becomes incredibly important that your sales match your service, which again, not rocket science. I mean, you hear it, every time you go to sales training or whatever, but in this business, it really is incredibly important.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, man. I think you kind of positioned it exactly how one in this business should think about it, which is, yeah, I mean, to your point exactly, like you cut the grass the wrong way, well, it's going to grow back and you can cut it again. If you smash heirlooms from my wedding, that's it. That's sort of the end of it. So
Right.
positioning and also maybe even like allowing that perspective to sort of like penetrate deep into the organization itself when you're talking about hiring people, when you're talking about, I think one thing that brands do that's so powerful is when they get everybody that works for them to adopt their brand fundamentals, right? Their brand perspective. And when you're a 16-year-old like I was, and you're going to work at the movie theater, and they're talking to you about like, this is the culture of national, or showcase cinemas or whatever the movie theater was, you roll your eyes a little bit. You're like, okay, whatever, but they're doing that because the brand itself had done such a good job of like establishing who they were and what they were offering. They weren't just selling you tickets to movies. They were creating an experience for you to ultimately go out to. You guys in the moving industry were not just selling the service of moving boxes around. You were selling security and maintaining sort of, your livelihood and who you are in your life moving from point A to point B. And that's such an important thing. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So counterpoint in terms of your career so far, what's been sort of that biggest hurdle for you as you guys, or as you have kind of navigated growth and acquisition? And I have a million questions about acquisition that I'll share, or sorry, that I'll save for maybe a time that you and I grab a bite to eat or something. But what's been that tough hurdle for you that's something that obviously was a great learning experience, but ultimately was a challenge?
Yeah, well, certainly within that, the moving and storage business, I'll concentrate there for a little bit. Um, i- so in that business, you mentioned, places you've worked like a movie theater or whatever, or fast food, or so by definition, many of those are franchises.
Yes.
I was going to mention an often used example for the cultural thing is the Chick-fil-A example, right?
That's right. That's right.
Where, the employees are all very well trained, and they say my pleasure, and everything people have talked about. Very much um, controlled, maybe that's not the right word, influenced certainly by the corporate office, right? This is the way we're going to do things. And people, adopt that because it works, right?
Yes.
You don't go to decide to buy a McDonald's franchise because you want to then get in there and change the way that it operates, or change the marketing. You do it because of that.
That's right.
Because so really, and this is a grossly oversimplified statement, and I've never been a McDonald's franchisee, so forgive me, but my impression is your first decision is really a real estate decision. It's
Right.
not a marketing decision or an operations decision. That's what you're buying, right? That process. So the moving business, the van line business is much different. It is not a franchise. What it is it's an affiliation. And so, without getting into too many details, it has to do with interstate moving versus local moving, right?
Yep.
So, in the case of the van line that I worked for, there were about 350 agents by the time that I left. And each of those businesses are small to anywhere from small to medium to large companies that, as part of the relationship with the van line, have agreed that they're going to fly that brand when they do interstate moving, as opposed
Gotcha.
to, right, when they do local, they do their own. So one of the hurdles was bringing on, in the case of Beacons, for example, 120 agents, I think at the time, um, who had their own way of doing things, who were used to a different set of rules, who were used to a different management group, and so whatever influence the previous owners had, right, over that group was immediately gone, right? And now they're under a different umbrella now, and sort of earning their trust. We talk about trust with the customer, but earning trust with the agents who are then going to be providing that service was a
Yes.
huge challenge. A huge challenge. They didn't know us from Adam. They didn't necessarily trust us. Comparatively, we were a very conservative company financially. getting into marketing. So we had our own way of doing things when it came to digital marketing, the amount of spend we were doing, when we chose to stop and start, Google ads was not the way they were doing it. And so when we dialed down, paid, advertising in the peak season, because typically we didn't really have to work very hard to fill up the trucks,
Sure.
during the middle of the summer, which was peak season. Um, they completely chafed at that and said, no, 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 you never turn it down. Why you turn it down? So there's all of those kinds of things that we had to earn their trust,
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
and it was a very long process. It was a very long process. And so we had, we had a really carefully planned, uh, a very time consuming sort of schedule where we brought them into the corporate office for meetings. They're from, all over the country. So we brought them into the corporate office for meetings. We got the number of airplanes I was on during that year is insane, right? Just going out to visit, them in their own environments, and having one-on-one conversations about, hey, here's who we are as a group. Here's who I am personally. They had to trust me, on and on and on. That was a big, big hurdle. And what was at stake for us was, if at the end of that process they decided that they didn't trust us, or they didn't want to be sort of enthusiastic participants, of this brand that we now owned, um, that was going to have a very negative effect on sales.
Yes.
And so the money that we would have spent, that we did spend to buy the company, would the return on that investment would have tanked very quickly
Yeah.
if they didn't, if they weren't on board.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. And probably, you asked about achievements. I mean, I think that was another one that we did get them on board, and that was very gratifying, because again, it worked, and sales went up afterwards.
It's an interesting question. Or I have what I think is an interesting follow-up question to exactly what you're talking about. And obviously the original question was the biggest hurdle, and that is tough. Like, that's tough to go sell, however many agents from that additional brand. Um, Again, a little bit off script here, but oftentimes my understanding of acquisitions is that EBITDA, or the valuation of a company, is oftentimes pretty tied into or associated with these types of contracts that are responsible for a percentage of revenue, a percentage of sales, right? So it sounds like you guys still had to go, as the acquiring business, had to almost go and secure those contracts or secure those agents, unless I'm misunderstanding the nature of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you're on the right track for sure. I think the issue is that, so the in this particular business, the contract with the agent is oh, how should I put it? It's almost, I was going to use the word philosophical. That's not really what I mean. The contract with the agent says, look, if you're going to do interstate moving,
Yeah.
then you have to do it underneath our umbrella if
Yeah.
you sign this contract, right?
Yep.
Um, but that's not, but we could agree to that. But then, like, let's say you were the agent, but then you could simply decide that, yeah, that's great, whatever. I'm just not going to do interstate moving. I'm just going to
Yeah.
become a
Right.
great local mover, in which case I get zero out
Yeah.
of that.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
And so there was no guarantee that bringing them on board and getting them to sign the contracts was going to produce the revenue that would have, created the EBITDA that we needed,
Yes.
in our models, and so on and so on and so on. And so, that was really the danger, was almost having a a passive non-participant,
Yep.
of a partner. Um, and so we had to get past that, and really get from apathy to enthusiasm as quickly as possible. And that was one thing. This gets out of the marketing arena, but a huge thing, and huge credit in those instances to our CEO at the time, and to the IT department. Um, those guys in that particular example, really all of our acquisitions, the way that they're structured, it's really kind of a hard cut. So prior to the cut, you're booking and someone else is getting that revenue, the previous owner. After the cut, I am as the new owner.
Yep.
They had to be able to book orders into our system overnight. Like before they were here, now they're over here. In order to make that happen, I mean, that is a Herculean effort
Yes.
to ensure that from an IT perspective, they're able to get into the system, understand how to use it, and start booking orders. Without it, you're not getting any revenue, right? And it
Right.
becomes very complicated. And so the IT department and the CEO did a tremendous job in putting us in the position to be able to accept their orders,
Yes.
that very next day after the
That's
acquisition.
amazing, man. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I have a brother. That's a weird way of saying it. My brother, who lives in England, works for a very large company, and yeah, changeover and kind of systems integration, all kinds of different stuff. When they do acquisitions, also is a very very complicated process. You know, you're buying a company who either has a more antiquated system or a more modern system. Rarely do you buy a company that has like a system that kind of merges and meets one to one, but that's massive. That's incredible that you guys were able to kind of maintain that and create that level of I think that level of I don't know, almost like bridge and umbrella to make sure that that was able to take place right away, which again, I'm sure back to the entire point created a tremendous amount of trust
Yes.
for these companies that you guys were kind of bringing into the fold. So that's awesome.
Yeah. No, that again, back to that trust fund was a big deal. That was that
That's
that
right.
was the primary issue. So
That's right. Well,
yeah.
I'm learning a lot about the moving industry. This is
More than
fantastic.
everyone did know.
That's right, man. Well, cool. So back to where you are today,
Yeah.
as you've kind of gone through this career and are now in a position to be able to provide some kind of fractional support to a couple of additional companies. Um, where are you finding, and I want to make sure I phrase this question the right way, but how are you getting your name out there today? And I know you and I talked about this beforehand. It is a little bit of a more recent kind of exchange. Before we jumped on, you talked a little bit about the AMA. You talked about some stuff that you're doing with them. How are you getting your name out there today to get some visibility? And again, this is for anybody listening who's considering the idea of going fractional, or who's already maybe made the leap to fractional and is looking for like, well, how do I get my name out there? How do I get in
Yeah.
front of people? How do I get sort of the momentum to start?
Yeah. Well, as you pointed out, I'm sort of at the beginning of that journey, but what's fascinating is that you can you can spend your entire career doling out what you think is really savvy advice to literally hundreds and hundreds of salespeople throughout my career. And then when it comes time for you to do it for yourself or to market yourself, you're like, oh my gosh, like I have to do this stuff. Like, so it really puts a different light, on the whole situation. So one of the other things you and I talked about, and this kind of bridges into that a little bit, is based on my age, I'm 54. Maybe I shouldn't say that out loud. Uh, I bridge a number of different sort of generational labels at this point, right? So in other words, I've been alive long enough to do the be. And I'm answering your question, by the way,
Yeah, yeah,
to do the pre the pre social media thing, frankly pre cell phones,
right.
to see the rise of all of those things and still be of the age where I'm obviously as part of my job, but also personally, very tuned into to that stuff, both personally and professionally, as part of a marketing strategy, right?
Yeah,
So I say all that to say that what I'm about to say, I am clearly not anti digital in any fashion. But what I have noticed, and this is advice that I would give to salespeople that I'm also trying to take my own advice on, is the idea that I think we're at a point where a bit of analog effort is actually becoming a differentiator,
Yes.
based on everything that's going on. So to answer your question directly, most of my efforts right now are really sort of based on good old fashioned networking.
Yes.
And I had been you brought up the AMA as an example. This is the American Marketing Association. I had been involved just as a member over the years, on and off. Sometimes let your subscription, your membership lapse, whatever the case is. But I made a concerted effort. It's like, okay, I'm going to go back to all of the organizations that I had been a part of, over the years, and I'm going to I'm going to sort of very purposefully and proactively take a larger role within the organization if that's available,
Yeah.
because it puts you in a position to rub elbows with folks that wouldn't come through your sphere necessarily on a
Yes.
daily basis, right? And so through some connections and so on, I became the vice president of communications for the AMA local chapter here in Indianapolis. In and of itself, doesn't seem like a big deal. But for example, we're planning a conference right now. So I'm reaching out to people as part of that conference to say, hey, we'd love to have you do this, that, and other thing. And what it does is it gives me the opportunity at some point over the next 3 weeks, let's say, surrounding that conference to say, hey, by the way, um, I don't know if you know this, but I'm doing XYZ.
Yes.
I think, if you ever need some assistance in that arena, I'd love to help you out. Or, hey, I noticed that, you were talking about, in one of the meetings we were in, there was a deficiency here, or you were looking for something. I'm that guy. I,
Yes.
I can help you out, whatever the case is. So it puts you in a position in a very unobtrusive way, to be able to have those conversations that you wouldn't normally have to do. There's been lots of books written about cold calling and so on, and the general thing that I've taken away from that, and certainly the advice I'd given, in sales training and so on, to thousands of sales trainings, is that if you don't want to make cold calls, then networking is the antidote to cold calling,
That's
right?
right.
It's a balance. So the more networking you do, the more you put yourself in front of people and have sort of conversations in a much more natural way, the less sort of door banging you're going to have to do, to get. Now you're going to have to do some,
Yeah.
and so
Right.
like I said,
Right.
those things are kind of in direct proportion.
That's right.
So the networking piece of it is really, I think, a fundamental strategy. So it's for me, it's been getting involved in those organizations. It's been going to as many meetings as I can. It's the good old fashioned, hey, can you get together for 15 minutes for coffee, that type of thing. I will say it's like I'm not. I mean, I was kind of kidding around before. It's humbling though. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
it's one thing to talk about it, and then it's another thing to do it. It's like
Yes.
what they say about sports. Those who can't play coach or something like
That's
that. Well,
right. That's right.
in this case, you're bringing yourself off the bench to further
That's
the
right.
sports analogy, right? And you got to get out there and do it yourself.
Yeah.
So
One.
that's been a big piece.
I was just gonna say one thing, just a personal story. I joined a agency mastermind recently, and one of the things that they encouraged me with is, as you're niching down, as you're trying to figure out exactly who you want to serve, um, knock doors, pull doors, and not necessarily homes like of where people reside or whatever, but go to businesses and go in and say, this is what I do, and here's a business card, right? And so I spent yesterday morning here in Hamilton, Ohio. I went to downtown Hamilton and I walked into 12 different law offices and gave them my business card. Hey, I'm Scott. I started an agency and I serve lawyers and law offices that are looking to increase their digital footprint and kind of improve their digital marketing. And I'll tell you, pretty much all of them were kind. Yeah, they were receptive to somebody willing to walk in the door. Now I talked to mostly, receptionists, but by and large, they were receptive to that. But it certainly is one of those things where it's like, yeah, I think it's a differentiator to your point. Exactly. You stand out a little bit more when you do it that way. And the cool thing I think about being fractional and about being a small agency is you don't need 2,000 clients. You don't need 8,000 clients, or you don't even need 100 clients, right? You just need a handful of clients to be loyal to you, that you can do great work for, that you can connect with. And that's also one of the natures of why I'm doing the podcast, is to hopefully get you, a couple of phone calls coming out of here. So AJ, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you being willing to jump on with us. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, you want me to just go ahead and throw my number
Please
out?
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I'm on 24/7. I'm here in Indianapolis. My number is 317-371-3444. Love to talk to folks on the phone. I always find that's the best way to kind of start off a relationship, find out what problems you're trying to solve, what you need help with. And I have a very simple website that outlines, my basic services and are designed to start that conversation. And that's schneidercg.com. So Schneider, Schneider, C like communications, G like group.com. And so you can find out a little bit about me and what I do there. And yeah, would love to have some conversations with folks and see what we can get started.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. Well, awesome. This has been Going Fractional. This is the podcast that helps individuals that are in an executive role take that leap into fractional. AJ Schneider, thanks so much for your time, brother. I appreciate you being on, and I'm excited for future conversations. I'm excited to keep tabs on how things go as you continue to grow, man. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
You bet, man.